Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about slave issues. Last class we talked about the compromise and how slavery was expanded into different territories and how certain territories had popular sovereignty. For the most part though, slavery was in the southern part of the United States, and we're going to talk about issues that slaves actually dealt with. So the first thing is slave revolt in Virginia, led by Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser. And this led to harsh laws in the South against fugitive slaves. So Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser, they led revolts. And a revolt is when you fight against someone. So this was actually when slaves fought against their owners. These were two separate incidences. Nat Turner had a much bigger one, but they both fought against their owners. They went to different plantations and they got more slaves and they killed a bunch of their owners, and these were large revolts. This led to white Southerners fearing slave rebellions. They were afraid that their slaves might be inspired and start fighting against them as well. And Southerners who favored abolition, just a reminder, an abolitionist is someone who believes that slavery should be legal, were intimidated into silence. So if you lived in the South and you were against slavery, usually you didn't say anything because bad things can happen to you. The other thing is William Lloyd Garrison published a newspaper named The Liberator, and Northerners viewed slavery as a violation of Christian principles and argued for abolition, which is to make slavery illegal. So The Liberator was a newspaper that was printed in the North, and it said slavery was bad, it was against Christian principles, and that should be illegal, as in not allowed. And Southerners grew alarmed by the growing force of the Northern response to these abolitionists. So a lot of people in the North were against slavery, and the South was afraid of that. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a book which was published by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it portrayed slavery as brutal, as in bad, and spread compassion for slaves in the North, and it angered slave owners in the South. So this book was about how bad slavery was. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, she wrote it, and she wanted people to know that slavery was bad. It wasn't good. And however, people in the South who had slaves, they didn't like it because they wanted to keep their slaves. There's another important court case called the Dred Scott decision. And Dred Scott was a slave. He sued for his freedom based on his owner moving him into the free state of Illinois in a Western territory. Last class, we did a bunch of maps that showed where slavery was allowed and where it was not allowed. And his owners moved him to Illinois. And Illinois is a free state. If you live in Illinois, you're supposed to be free. So he sued because he wanted to be free. However, the court said that slaves were property, not citizens, and could not sue in the courts. So he wasn't allowed to sue because he was not a citizen. Slaves are not considered citizens. The court also said the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. There was another thing called the Underground Railroad, and many enslaved African Americans began escaping the South by using the Underground Railroad. A lot of slaves did not want to stay in the South because you're a slave in the South. If you escape to the North, you're no longer a slave. And the Underground Railroad was a system that slaves could use to hide at houses in order to escape to the free North. If a slave made it to the northern states, they were free and no longer slaves. However, Southerners, where slavery existed, were angry that slaves escaped and demanded the North return them Northerners would not release the former slaves to the South. This is the Underground Railroad. So a lot of people who wanted to help slaves would let them hide in their house, and they would hide here, and they would just go from one city, go to the next town, go to the next town, until they escaped to the north. Some of them did try to escape to Mexico, some of them escaped to the Caribbean, but most of them went to the north or Canada, where they would be free and they'd no longer be slaves. But they had to hide. If you were caught in the South and you were a slave trying to escape, the punishment would be very severe. This led to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, and it's a law that said if a slave escapes to the north, they must be returned to their owners in the South. So that changed a lot of things, because if you're a slave and you get caught in Pennsylvania, which is a free state, you had to be returned to whoever your owner was. So if you were in Atlanta and you went to New York and you were caught, you were returned to your owner in Atlanta. A lot of people in the North did not like this law, and this changed the Underground Railroad. A lot of people, they just went up to Canada instead, because in Canada you would not be returned. And this doesn't have to do with slavery, but there's something very important called the nullification crisis that led to the Civil War. And these are people who supported states' rights, and they had a big meeting in the South named the Carolina Exposition and Protest. And people who supported states' rights felt that individual states should be able to nullify, get rid of tariffs. If you remember, the South did not like tariffs, whereas the North favored high tariffs. And supporters of state rights also believed that states could nullify, get rid of federal law, and leave the Union, which is the United States, if they chose. So they were talking about leaving the United States and form their own country. And the nullification crisis essentially is South Carolina stopped paying taxes, and President Andrew Jackson threatened to send troops to South Carolina to protect federal law. South Carolina did end up paying the tariffs, but for a little while they were saying, we're not going to pay taxes and we're going to leave the United States. They ended up deciding to pay the tariffs, but this was just showing that the South was not getting along with the other parts of the United States. All right, that's it for today. If you guys have any questions, let me know.